I previously talked about some children's movies that have a darker tone to them. In particular, Toy Story 3, which is actually, and I didn't mention this before, which it's actually based on the Brave Little Toaster, which is also a children's movie that actually isn't really a children's movie and has a much darker tone to it, a much darker underlying tone. A similar movie, I mean, in a similar vein, is the movie Paddington, with the cute, cuddly bear, kind of like Ted, just without the dirty jokes. But actually, Paddington also has an underlying tone, underlying theme to it, a kind of a hidden meaning, but it's actually very obvious if you watch it. Paddington is, I'm referring to the movie, but of course it's also based on the books. Paddington is about refugees, asylum seekers, particularly orphans, orphans of refugees, or refugee orphans, how do you say that correctly? You know what I mean. Children, basically children who had to flee their country. In Paddington is because of natural disasters, and Paddington has to flee from Peru. And it's obvious that it's kind of there are a lot of references there, and it's if you watch the movie, it's very obvious actually that Paddington really isn't a bear. The way people are treating him is not like a bear. Nobody is treating him like a bear. Everybody in the entire movie, from beginning to end, is treating him like a refugee, and it's obvious that he's a child. So actually, he's a orphan refugee orphan. You know what I mean. So and this is also made very obvious when Paddington. It's even explained in the movie. There's some there are a lot of references with that. So just watch the movie and keep that in mind. The entire movie is really about refugees and the way refugees are treated. Because actually, particularly in the beginning of the movie, Paddington is treated pretty badly, and nobody seems to like it. And everybody says, oh yeah, you know how it goes. If one bear comes along, then he brings his entire family, and soon enough we'll have all kinds of bears here. And it's very obvious that it's really about refugees. But of course, Paddington is not an ordinary refugee. He's a child. He's an orphan. So it's actually a very sad story. Well, of course, it has a happy ending. And of course, the villain in the movie, you can guess that they also have real life counterparts. I think this movie is particularly interesting if you see it in the light of the recent refugee crisis in Europe. When you have the situation where a lot of refugees come from Syria and are fleeing from the Islamic State and other countries where there are wars, or they're fleeing from persecution, and of course the climate in Europe, there are some neo-Nazis, stuff like that. So there are a lot of people in Europe who don't want to take in refugees, and of course it also includes children. There are many children coming over, and they're treated in exactly the same way that Paddington is treated initially in the movie, which I think is terrible. And the movie compares it themselves compares it that in the past it was better. The movie itself explains that in the past, like for example during the Second World War, all those refugees, and especially the children, they would be welcomed with open arms, and and this is just not the case anymore. So yeah, it's actually really sad. And if you watch the movie and you realize that it's really about war orphans, orphans that don't have a home, that are fleeing from persecution, children, that are fleeing from persecution, and how they were welcomed with open arms in the past, and how they are treated now. And this is really what Paddington is about. And if you watch it in that light, it's actually really sad.